All right, welcome back to Legally Everywhere. Where we looking into everything. Welcome back to video 2. So part 2 of the what am I calling this? Venezuela oil BRICS and the law series. Okay, the what's actually happening because it's a lot going on. Okay, so in part 1, that was more of the history. I gave you the history from about 1989 to about 2002. So if you want that historical information, I would like to redirect you to go to the first video. Okay, from this video forward, we're moving from 2002 onward. Okay. Okay. And I just wanted to point out just why history matters, right? Because literally current events don't pop up out of nowhere. This is literally the results of decades of decisions. And I wanted to make sure that as we're covering this information throughout my channel, we kind of review it through the lens of governance, that we actually understand what happened and the different nuances and pieces, the different puzzles and pieces that went into play, so it all can actually make sense. Because if you're just looking at it based off current events, it's really confusing. So once again, we cover the pre 1998 Venezuela, but we also looked at 1989 specifically. We talked about foreign oil control, Chavez being elected in 1998, and some democratic backsliding, right? And then we move right into 2002, which is where we are right now, where we talk about the coup attempt. So let's take us there. Matter of fact, let me just make this a little bit more clear. It wasn't just mismanagement. It's isolation, capital flight, and technical strangulation, right? And combining all of that crippled what was once Latin America's like energy powerhouse, right? Because if you have all those factors going on and then everything else I just described, right? How can you function? How can you get the stuff out and get it where it gotta go? Keep it in mind. All right, so we are 2002, the coup attempt, right? Let's be very clear. A failed coup changes everything, right? It changes everything. External funding of opposition matters when it comes to the conversation of trust, right? We're talking about contracts, laws, treaties, and engagement, with other places, business and bodies, right? You have a lot weighing on trust. And if you feel like external funding for opposition, is occurring, that matters with regards to trust. The U.S. government officially said it was not involved in any form of a coup. However, the National Endowment of Democracy funded various Venezuelan groups, which I have right here on the screen. One second. So I just wanted to make sure I outline that because that gives us a cause and effect kind of conversation, right? And also note that after this occurred, Chavez governed more defensively and aggressively, you know? So let us be mindful of that as we transition into oil nationalization, which happens around 2007. Okay, so I just wanted to note that regime change doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a grant. You know what I'm saying? You don't always have to say, oh, I'm wearing this hat of affiliation to say I support you or I'm down for this particular party, team, or affiliation, right? Sometimes it's you put your money where your mouth is. It's saying I got your six. And by me having your back, I'm putting money behind you to make sure you can be in the rooms that you need to be in as long as you need to be in there and know that you are supported, right? So sometimes it's wearing a grant, it's wearing funding. What I always say we must do, we must ask the question of, in your discussions, in your agreements, what did they give you? Like, how much money did they give you? Why did they give it to you? And if they didn't give you money yet, what was the agreement? What did they promise to give you later? Right? Okay. So with that also being said, I want to address the second piece, which would be Marina Corina Machado. She was involved in opposition activism during that period, and I just wanted to note some special information with regards to her. If you look online, you'll see a lot of discussion about the Nobel Peace Prize or Nobel Award. She doesn't actually have a Nobel Peace Prize because I did try to look it up so I could give you guys that receipt. She doesn't, in fact, have one. She has a lot of international awards and acknowledgments because she's done a lot within the advocacy world. However, she does not have that award because I did look it up. We would be able to find that as a public receipt, and I could not find it. When I looked deeper, I found that we couldn't even find out if she was even nominated because nominations are maintained as confidential for 50 years. And the only way we'll be able to obtain that is if the person who nominated actually produced their nomination. So, okay, so at this point, we're in 2007, and we want to outline that Venezuela, right, they regained control over the oil assets, which is, keeping in mind, this was their asset to start with. They're the one who has the majority of the oil reserves in their area, right? They're able to gain control over the oil assets. So what happens now? Somebody who was functioning as a minority, their own asset, is now functioning a little bit more of the majority capacity, which means those foreign bodies that we discussed in part 1 that came in and had these very, let's say, lucrative deals, these deals that were very advantageous to their, let's call it, to their benefit, right? Now they're losing money because they're no longer the majority beneficiary of these contracts. Now they're getting a smaller stake, which means they're losing money. And let's say they're losing operational controls, they're losing some of the money. Okay, we always know it's about the money, dollar bill, y'all. Okay, so this is more like an economic turning point, right? That causes a need for arbitration, right? So they go into arbitration, right? I said they went into arbitration. But Exxon Mobil is the one who sued. They won, right? $1.4 billion in compensation. Okay, that's cool. Here's the question, governance question. Who enforces an arbitration judgment on a sovereign nation that controls its own resources? Because keep in mind, it was their own resource in their sovereign nation. And it's up. So who gonna make them run that money is the question, right? That's where we at. Who gonna make them get that $1.4 billion in compensation? Who gonna make them run the money? Okay, to the next point. Okay, so now we're talking about the collapse of production. I'm gonna say it very simply. It takes money to make money, right? Anybody who has had any type of anything, whether it's a home or some other type of like electronic or some type of property, maintenance can be something else. Facilities can deteriorate when, you don't have like the appropriate level of like maintenance or funding, technical support, expertise, what have you, like the people's appropriate subject matter experts, and properly funding them so they stay. That becomes a problem. Systemic, let's say, corruption, people siphoning off budgets. We know that type of stuff happens everywhere. But when the money that's supposed to be sent and used maybe isn't being used like how it's supposed to be used, sanction pressures and all of that. And then on top of it, right, at their peak, it was about 3 million barrels a day. And I looked it up. It said recent output was under 1 million barrels a day. So, like, one, they haven't been able to go back to their peak. Two, it's a conversation of the resources stayed, the systems collapse. The main portion is systems, like the resource itself stayed, but the systems that supported the production, that collapsed. And then they actually haven't been able to get it back up to that point since then. So just kind of keep that in mind, right? Because that's going to play a factor too, right? Supply and demand. We're talking about economics, talking about the money, but the supply, okay, you follow, right? Okay. So for my visual learners, I just wanted to put that here, right? Infrastructure decay, corruption, sanction pressure, okay? Was it isolation, capital, technical, don't necessarily know, right? Essentially, it's just a lot of pieces in play. It's kind of hard to solve for a puzzle when you got all this stuff going on, right? Okay, y'all. So, Chavez died in 2013, okay? Maduro, he assumed power, right? And he inherited control systems, right? He inherited a fragile system. It's not like he just had, a beautiful day in the neighborhood, won't you be my neighbor type of stuff. This looked like he had a handful going on when he walked into the situation. Now, even with that being said, under his leadership, right, and it appears he has his style, from what I read, right, it deepens authoritarianism, right? He political oppression faces systemic prosecution, right? There's a lot I put on the screen for you to read it at your leisure. But just kind of keeping that in mind, his leadership style. You had corruption, you had mismanagement accelerate. It was a lot going on. And for the most part, what I'm going to say is it's a cautionary tale. It's a cautionary tale. It's a cautionary tale, and I'm going to tell you why it's cautionary. This is a cautionary tale about how legitimate grievances can be weaponized, okay? They can be weaponized to justify authoritarian consolidation, right? To switch certain things that shouldn't necessarily be happening into things that you are observing, right? It's a cautionary tale. And it brings us to our next question. Our next question is very simple, right? When does the fight for sovereignty become the justification? When does it become the justification for oppression? When does it become the justification for oppression? And who decides where that line is drawn? Right? Because we see some things in modern day, right? Who decides where the line is drawn? Okay, so up next, we're going to talk about sanctions, currency, and BRICS involvement and how all this starts to connect to law. Child, we're legally everywhere looking into everything. This is video 2, part 2. We have more videos coming because I wanted to make sure that we were able to grasp what is actually happening. But to understand, we must first go look back at history to see what happened before. Okay, see you in the next video.